Hey guys, welcome to the Omniverse of Nick. What if Negan used Jason Voorhees, the finale? Make sure, before we begin, to smash the like button and subscribe to the Omniverse of Nick, and check out the About tab and homepage so you don't miss anything that the Omniverse has to offer for the future, and in general. With all that said, let's begin. We open up where we ended off last time. The RV with everybody in it, definitely a more enhanced group in this timeline, go to the hilltop to help Jesse and Maggie with their pregnancies, but it's not the Saviors and the beat up hilltop member that they meet in the road this time. They see two figures, a man with a barbed wire bat and a blonde haired girl, Laura, with Negan, and a huge U-Haul truck behind them face as the RV begins to approach them. Rick and everybody step out of the RV and say, "It's not smart to stay in the middle of the road. Are you from somewhere? Or are you going to start something with us? We're in a hurry." And Negan and Laura just sinisterly smile and say, "Oh no, we're not going to start something. That is if you don't first. Give us half of your stuff that you possess at the moment and where you're coming from, and then we'll be on our way." Rick says, "Nah, that deal's not going to work for them." And he says, "The fact is, if they were from somewhere, they'd be asking for half of their stuff. But only they're thinking they don't have to go about this a violent way. That's if these two, by themselves compared to the bunch of people they have, aren't looking to try to start something with them. They'd be no match." Laura just points her gun straight at Rick, showing that they're not backing down, no matter how outnumbered they are. And Negan just walks with Lucille towards everybody, with everybody having guns now trained on them, and says, "Well, I did say that we could have done this the easy way, but I guess you've chosen the hard way." And Negan points a gun, and when it still shows that nobody's given an inch, Negan just turns away with his head down, exasperated. And he says, with another sinister smile, and Lucille back over his shoulder, says, "Well, I guess we're doing this the hard way." And him and Laura open up the huge back of this abandoned, rundown U-Haul, and a bunch of walkers storm out of it. Rick and everybody pull out their guns, and it's an effortless kill. It's basically like the farm, if you really think about it. And Rick says, "Is that all you've got? If so, get out of our way. We're not asking you again." But Negan just smiles and says, "Did you really think that we would come all this way, hoping to find another community or people, and walkers is the best we have to offer? Please." And Negan, holding Lucille out in front of him and them, says, "You haven't even begun to see what Negan and the Saviors are capable of." And in the very, very back of the U-Haul, who was behind the walkers, lays Jason Voorhees, chained from leg to chest to neck to arms. And they can see inside the U-Haul, just barely, because the darkness is covering him. But Rick's beginning to think the rumors, I think, are true, guys. And Laura goes in and unlocks the chains for Jason. Then she just runs out of there as fast as she can. Jason picks up a spear and begins to exit the vehicle. Rick says, "No, the rumors are true. Everybody, guns aimed, fire at will." And Jason throws the spear straight through Abraham's eye. So basically, he gets his comic death, except it's not an arrow that goes through his eye. It's a whole freaking spear. So yeah, he's kind of dead. Rick just says, "Now!" and everybody just shoots mercilessly at Jason. Everybody. Daryl, Morgan, Rick, Maggie, Glenn, Carl, Sasha, Rosita, Rick with his python, and a bunch of different weapons. Everybody is just shooting mercilessly, not giving an inch or caring how much ammo they're spending. Jason is getting hit, and it is affecting him, but he just walks through the bullets. At some point, it stops seeming to have effect, and he's just walking through menacingly. And this actually begins to scare Rick and everybody else. Negan is just sitting there with Laura grinning. But Rick says, "Don't let up! Keep firing!" And Daryl pulls out the rocket launcher, and it does fling Jason back, and it does explode him. But he just walks through the fire, ash, and destruction, and he's on fire. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. And Rick is beginning to get even more scared and furious, and he just yells to everybody, "Keep firing!" And Daryl pulls out his crossbow, and everybody is just raining down every bullet and exhaust of ammunition they have. But Jason's still on fire and seemingly injured, just still cruising through this onslaught. And Negan says, "Enough playing games. Destroy them!" Jason, seemingly listening to Negan for the very first time, steps straight towards the group and begins the onslaught. Carl is the first to die. Rosita tries to fight back, but she is the next one. Then Sasha, then Jessie, and her unborn baby. Maggie and her unborn baby. Glenn, Dwight, Sherry. Eugene sees that Abraham is clinging to life, so he barely escapes death to try to help him, but Abraham loses any sort of fight that he has as he sacrifices whatever life he has in him to protect Eugene. Aaron's the next one. Daryl puts up one of the most fights against Jason, but he's still no match. Michonne is next, trying to use every part of her strength with her sword and everything, but it's just met with utter resistance and ferocity from Jason. Rick, Eugene, and just a few others are the only ones left to stand up to Jason. And Jason's just about to strike at them and finish the job whenever a bunch of unexpected saviors, not Negan, but actual saviors, show up. Owen is shown to be alive with one arm gone and coming in for the save. Morales, who didn't join Negan in this timeline, is side by side with Owen. The Croat, who didn't join Negan, is side by side with them and Sadiq getting rescued early. All four of them with melee weapons and guns, along with Rick, Eugene, and the few others that are alive, now pull out all the stops and are holding nothing back. And with all of their friends and family dead, they have nothing left to lose. But Jason just fights ferociously and menacingly through this entire onslaught. And with machete, saw, arrow gun, and spear, and everything that you could think that Jason could use, especially handpicked from Negan, Owen, Morgan, Carol, Morales tries to fight, but he is killed too. The Croat, Sadiq, and at the end of it all, Rick is just sitting there, all by himself, just seeing that he's the only one left, with Eugene taking the fall for him. And he just yells out, "If you're going to kill me, just get it over with. I have nothing anymore." But Negan says, "Jason, stop. That's enough." And Negan says for Jason to stand down. Negan will be the one to end Rick himself. But Jason, he stirs, just holds down his machete in hand, and then he stares right at Negan and begins to step towards him. Slowly, but very, very menacingly. But Negan now sees that Jason wasn't listening to him. He was doing all of that of his own accord, just like he always has. So there's only one thing to do now, and he tells Laura to press the button and electrocute Jason. But Laura says she's trying, but she can't, because it turns out all those explosions, all those melee weapons, all those bullets, all those attacks, all that fire caused Jason's electric collar to break off. And it's completely destroyed by the ash, rubble, and destruction of this entire battle. Negan, seeing the collar on the ground in shards and in ruin, now knows what's about to happen to him. Jason rips Lucille out of Negan's hands, and Negan now knows he's about to die. Jason, with Lucille and machete in hand, goes to strike down at Negan. Then a flash. We see Negan on the banister at the sanctuary with CRM helicopters invading, storming, and destroying everything of the sanctuary. And then he would be the last. Jason, he was a great looming savior. But these flashes that he has had, these hallucinations, these thoughts, and even just now, all of these just thoughts, it just proves Jason Voorhees is uncontrollable, and he was never going to listen to Negan. The Reapers, Jason was able to take care of them. The Whisperers, even easier. Beta was the strongest, but Jason proved too much. And he proved way too much for Negan to control. Every time that one of these instances, he'd be thinking about Jason is far too much. And then the CRM and the Commonwealth would team, and they would finally defeat Jason. And it all just flashes between Jason's life, Negan going through all of these instances with him, and then it flashes to Negan with the Whisperers, and him thinking about Jason in the same way that Negan's thought about him over and over and over again in the other instances. And he knows that Jason, he would kill him and all the Whisperers in an instant. And then it flashes to Negan's Whisperer mask that Negan's holding, showing present-day Negan at the end of The Walking Dead, showing that all of this, all of these thoughts, this entire time, had just been a hallucination process. And this connects with Negan's Alpha story, showing that both of the stories had connected to one linear point of Negan thinking at the end of true redemption, and it tying into the end of The Walking Dead. And he smiles, saying that he's glad that he made the right choice. And he's also glad he never met Jason. Because if any of those had happened, he wouldn't be standing here right now, about to look Maggie in the eye, coming towards him, and showing that Negan is truly a changed man. Whether it be a thought process of joining Alpha, or Jason Voorhees meeting one of the most iconic villains turned redeemed heroes of all time. And even in a hallucination or a dream or anything, nothing changes Negan's choice here today as he stares at Maggie coming towards him for one final talk. So, I know, I basically, in a way, copied what I've done with Dale's story, Negan's Alpha story, and kind of a few of the Marvel stories when you really think about it. But that's simply down to the fact that some stories are left as more or less just ideas within a character's own thought process. Especially when you register something like the MCU, where all the timelines that I have done before, mostly all of them anyway, and ones that I will continue to do, especially when you account for the omniverse and time travel, universe, multiverse, whatever you want to call it. Let's just put it this way. The universe, as we know it, is one thing. Think about how we, as a universe, as a whole, there's a lot about the universe that we don't know, which is why we make stuff up all the freaking time. We don't know as much about the universe, the multiverse, or the omniverse as we'd like to think. So, honestly, this story was just a symbolization of what really could have happened and just the thought process of one's mind, even if it was a false story. But it's not like I'm the first one to do that. Yes, I have done it with the Negan Alpha and the Dale story. 40 freaking parts, by the way, still my biggest work. And many of other freaking stories before. Stewie Griffin has had a simulation freaking story and multiple episode run thing. And there have been lots and lots of interpretations that weren't actually real to one canon story. Especially when you factor in a lot of shows and movies. Many of them are dreams. Many of them are daydreams, nightmares, or just thoughts. This would basically just be a daydream plus thought. It's like the Negan Alpha story and the Dale story to a T, where it's basically like something that the character could visualize, maybe did visualize, and realistically could have happened to canonize said event, whether it's Dale surviving, Negan becoming the Alpha, Negan meeting Jason Voorhees and using him as a ultimate tool. But just because this wasn't real to an actual idea doesn't mean that the idea and concept, even if it was multiple flashes, could not have still happened. So by the beginning point, that was the first flash in which Negan would begin to conflict with the very idea and notion that meeting someone like Jason Voorhees would even be remotely possible. Even though it's a false show anyway, with walkers and variants and tigers and a lot of other things, but we're gonna ignore that. Anyway, yeah. Basically, the whole idea comes to a forefront of, yeah, it's one unrealistic thing coming into the idea of another unrealistic thing. So, yeah. Can't really argue, especially whenever it's a what-if story. But I do hope that even if it was, especially by the end, so crazy that it flashed multiple times, you guys ultimately get where I came from with the whole idea of Negan basically conflicting with the very idea of Jason Voorhees even being involved with him in the first place. Because, let's be honest, with how Negan would be after getting redeemed, he wasn't thinking as clearly or even having a notion of a different kind of era thought or even notion process. But there is one thing that makes the Negan Alpha and this story mean more than you could honestly think. And it makes the whole thought process of thinking about these two stories in his own head all the more logical. Just like Dale being the older one in his story and his head being logical. Even if it's later events. Difference, Negan's thinking of earlier events. Dale was thinking of events past his death. But you guys, I hope you still appreciate that. Side note, sorry Dale. Anyway, the whole idea is that when Negan told Maggie that if he did it all over again, he would have killed every one of them, that to me is the ultimate symbolization of like, hey, you can use Negan's ultimate thought process and what he is as a character to blend in other ideas that could have involved him being involved in a certain way in a different story. It's just that if the story is not directly involving him and it's about something else, especially what you've done in stories before, you can't always center it to that being the thought process, especially if events that you already had put in place didn't happen by the time you made specific stories. Like, what if Negan and Carl joined forces? What if Negan met Gareth? It's like, you can't think about those things, especially whenever, like I said, it's a what if, so things can get hairy and complicated. But I think you guys get the main gist of the whole Jason Voorhees and Alpha ideas basically connect, not together, but also together. As a matter of fact, I also want to say that since Negan also had the thought process of being still with Alpha and meeting Jason Voorhees, which, by the way, is going to be another what if centering in Jason. He is going to be involved with the variants in France, and he's going to be involved with Alpha and the Whisperers. So, Negan having that thought process along with joining Alpha together, I can see him thinking about both of those things at the same time. So the Negan Alpha story and this story could have been thought about at the exact same time, and it would have made a cohesive whole and made sense, especially since I ended the story the same way. Not that I was meaning to do that in an entirely whole, but there's a reason why I did that. It's because if I were to kill Jason, who is basically immortal and cannot die, even though it's been shown that he can die before, but he has been able to be brought back to life, especially when you factor in the first 3 movies, if I had somehow miraculously someway killed Jason, it would have basically made the rest of the story pointless and would have focused on The Walking Dead rather than Jason Voorhees, and it would have been a bittersweet and kind of boring rest of the story. And Jason Voorhees is just... he's in a fine line where The Walking Dead is like, he's definitely more suited for things like John Wick or the MCU or Lord of the Rings. The Walking Dead is almost too weak for him, but he still balances great depending on who you put him with, which group you put him in, or where you put him in specifically. So, yeah, Freddy Krueger is never going to happen because there's no way to make that make sense, especially dreams and everything. And Michael Myers, it's just, I like Michael Myers, but I can't center him into a story and actually make sense. It's just would be an analysis for him and Freddy, if anything. And I could just tell you right now, there's no point in putting into characters like that that really don't need or even have to be put into a story for The Walking Dead. So, honestly, I can see the Alpha and the Jason Voorhees ideas connecting together into one story. I'm not going to be combining the 2 movies into one thing, though. God, no, that would be confusing. But I can tell you from a what-if perspective, that could also be very well canonize and make more sense as to why it kept flashing, because it was originally, in my opinion, going to be an idea of Negan thinking about all this and then him just conflicting so much that he snaps back to reality right before Maggie goes to talk to him. But I could think that it would actually make more sense if he was thinking about being the new Alpha and Jason Voorhees at the exact same time, because then that would not only help canonize and really redeem him, maybe even more so than he already was, even though by frickin' season 11, Negan was redeemed. Like, come on now. Even if Dead City did some things to conflict that. But, yeah. I definitely think that no matter which way you add it up, this is the best way that you can honestly make Negan's Jason Voorhees and the Alpha stories make sense, because otherwise, it's just either very dark. Let me just say this right now. It's a freaking dark ending. Think about it. Negan's the alpha. I've already shown as to what would happen there. Yes, he would conflict so much by that point that he would hurt. But the Jason Voorhees one, oh god, no. World's done. Because it would be too much for him to control. And Jason Voorhees would just go on a murderous rampage. At that point, the world would be done. And honestly, I just don't see any other way besides making it, like, think about how I made the Dale story so freaking bloody dark and freaking brutal, and then made it a daydream at the end. Because, let's be honest, who would want to see a story with a sad ending, or a very dark ending, you know? If you think about it, I still did do those for all those 3 stories, including this one, but it's a dark ending within a thought process. So when you think about it, I did still do a dark ending. I'm just making it more logical as to what would actually happen, you know? Especially if the story is so boring or short. Before that, the Dale one, that was more or less just a Stewie ripoff, you know? But for the both Negan stories, it was honestly just a way to center them both together by the time I'm recording this, and just mostly makes sense, you know? So, I do hope that you guys don't think that this is a repeat. I definitely did not want to make it a repeat, but like I said, I didn't really have another way to counteract it. Because if I did make Jason kill everybody, and do all this, that, and the other thing, it would just be... it would show the ultimate meaning, but it would be the too obvious meaning, you know? That's why I did the Jason Walking Dead thing. That was the obvious meaning. This one, I wanted to change it up very much to make it worth the anticipated wait of actually putting Jason in a story for once on this channel, you know? And if I somehow made the characters win, then it would take away from the entire idea of Negan and Jason Voorhees, which is the centerpiece of the entire story. Either way, it would ruin it. It would be very, very boring. So, I do hope that you guys enjoyed this 3-part tale. I honestly thought that it was going to be longer, but hey, a story is a story. No matter which way you add it up, if the story calls for something specific, you can't change fate. And with that, I do hope that you guys enjoyed this story for what it's worth. And do not worry. Yes, I have done 3 stories like this. The MCU is different because of the time stone. But I know. I have done 3 Walking Dead stories on this channel as of this point that have been exactly at the end like this. But do not worry. Because, as the vast majority of the Walking Dead stories on this channel will tell you, that is far from my main source of usage for when it comes to a story. And I bet you guys know that there are plenty of videos that really state this claim thoroughly. But if you guys are not bothered by this and you feel that this ending was justified, let me know. Because honestly, I think that this is the best way to centerpiece this idea into a cohesive story. And with this, I promise you, these 3 will likely be the only 3 stories for a good long minute that you see end the way that this has. And with all that said, I truly hope that you guys enjoyed What If Negan Used Jason Voorhees, and I will see you guys in the Bardock Super Saiyan analysis story, because there's a lot to talk about there. But I'll see you guys then, and thank you guys for checking out this story.